Good afternoon or good evening, depends where you are. And greetings and welcome everyone. My name is Roxana Senishin and I am the co-chair of Intercultural Communication Intersection of TESOL International. And I'm co-hosting this webinar with my colleague who is the chair of Second Language Writing Intersection, Aylin Atilgan-Raliye. Well, thank you for joining us today. This session will be recorded and it will last 60 minutes. So please keep your microphone muted during the presentation. If you have questions, we'd like you to write those questions or comments in the chat box. We'll have time after the presentation to address your questions. I would like to take a brief moment just to introduce to you Intercultural Communication Intersection if you are new to TESOL. Intercultural Communication Intersection is dedicated to building a professional community that enhances expertise in intercultural learning and intercultural communication in language, learning in teacher education, and in professional development. We are committed to sharing theory, research findings, and best practices that are relevant to our practices. We also provide assistance if you need to advocate for intercultural learning and intercultural communication in your institutions and in your own context and environments. So I would like to ask now my colleague, Aylin, to talk a little bit about the second language writing intersection. Aylin?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, Roxana. We are very happy to have you here today. And my name is Aylin Atilgan-Raliye, and I'm the chair of the Second Language Writing Intersection. So we are very happy to be collaborating with the Intercultural Communication section today. So let me also give you a little bit information about our intersection. The Second Language Writing Intersection is dedicated to facilitating interaction among members of TESOL who desire to further the teaching and research of writing in second language contexts, including ESL, EFL, and EAP. So, now I would like to introduce our speaker that you have been waiting for. So we are very honored to have Dr. Ulla Connor here with us today. And Ulla's presentation title is Robert Kaplan's Legacy from Constrastive Rhetoric to Intercultural Rhetoric Research. So we are going to look forward to listening to her. And I would also like to give you some information about our speaker today. So Ulla Connor is director of the International Center for Intercultural Communication and Zimmer Endowed Chair at Indiana University, Purdue University in Indianapolis. She has taught ESL, EFL, ESP, and teacher education in many countries and contexts, including public schools, colleges, and in professional and community workplaces. Her publications include the books, Constrastive Rhetoric, Cross-Cultural Aspects of Second Language Writing, CUP 1996, and Intercultural Rhetoric in the Writing Classroom, University of Michigan Press, 2011. So once again, we are honored and very happy to have dear Ulla Connor with us today. And now we are going to look forward to listening to her. Yes, Ulla.
Thank you very, very much for this opportunity. And thank you everyone for coming. I am grateful for Roxana and Aylin for organizing this webinar on second language writing and intercultural rhetoric. And I'm truly honored to have been invited to talk about the legacy of Bob Kaplan in second language writing, intercultural rhetoric, and in TESOL and applied linguistics. Bob Kaplan was one of the first leaders in our organizations in TESOL, applied linguistics, He was an excellent researcher, and he was also very active in our professional organizations. He was a giant on whose shoulders we stand and continue his work that, that has been so fruitful. Now, I was not a student of Bob's. I was his mentee. He was a wonderful person with the heart of gold. But as his students would also, admit, he was rather direct in communication. He could be blunt. He could sound a little gruff, but that was just Bob. And I have one anecdote that I'd like to start this to set the scene. This was about 15 years ago, and Bob was honored at College Composition Communication Conference in Chicago, invited by Victor Villanueva, who was very much also influenced by Bob's work in contrastive rhetoric, intercultural communication. And I was invited to introduce Bob for that huge audience at College Communication. So I wanted to do a really good job, and I worked hard, wrote a long explanation about his accomplishments, wanted to really introduce him for the 4C's audience. And I was just so nervous and so proud that I was able to give that introduction in front of that big audience. And I sat down, and Bob got up to the podium. And instead of saying, "Thank you for that wonderful introduction," he said, "That sounds like an obituary." And I knew Bob. I knew that he meant praise or thank you with it. So let me talk about Bob Kaplan as a leader in our field. Let me first start to telling you about his background. He was born in New York City. He served in the military in the Korean War. He got his bachelor's degree in Oregon, where he also met his sweet wife, Audrey. He got his MA and PhD at University of Southern California, where he also continued as a professor from 1963 to 1996. And he retired in Port Angeles, Washington in 1996 in a very cute, pretty house close to his daughter, Robin Gibson, and Robin's family. And he continued his professional writings from there. Now, his leadership in our organization is so noteworthy. He was a president of the NAFTA organization in early 1980s. He was a president of TESOL, and he was a president of AAAL. And let's keep in mind, TESOL and AAAL were young organizations at that time. And for his leadership in all of those has been so valuable for us in TESOL and in multilingual teaching. His research, why can't I move this now? I'm moving to my next slide. Why isn't, yeah, what is going on here? Matt, can I get some help?
Just click here.
Yes, I thought I did it. Thank you. His research primary areas were two. First, second language writing, discourse analysis. That is still continuing, and his work in applied linguistics, starting journals that are still very relevant, Annual Review of Applied Linguistics. But later work of his and influence was more on language policy issues. And the fact that he was developing sub-disciplines in applied linguistics and TESOL in other areas, that also is noteworthy, and becoming a leader in all of those areas. Now, but I think what we need to remember Bob and what we so appreciate about him, his students and his mentees, is his devotion to the field and dedication to his students and mentees, and his work on championing minority rights. I would like to tell you about another event that would really, I think, show very concretely how much he meant to his students and to us in TESOL and applied linguistics as researchers and professionals. 2 years ago, 2018, Dwight Atkinson and Paul Brew-Theo organized a reception, a party, a day in Port Angeles in Bob Kaplan's home to honor him and to celebrate his legacy and offer our thanks for what he had meant for all of us. There were maybe 10 of us or more there. We gathered there for half a day of partying, dinner, wonderful time together in a sunny home of his in Port Angeles, seeing the ocean and seeing the ships out there and enjoying seeing him. He sat there in his armchair smiling. We were so happy to see his library, which was filled with books, where he continued to do reading and writing. And what was so touching was the speeches that his students gave to him. We were sitting in a living room there, of many of us on the floor, giving him thanks and talking about what he'd done for us. And I realized that Bob Kaplan was the model of a good teacher, good researcher, someone who was so generous, was a leader in research, was so generous and sharing, and a good teacher. And he helped all of us for 20 or 30 years. After his students had graduated, he taught his students how to write, publish, and present. And think about it. So many of his students have become the leaders in our field and also leaders in our professional organizations, true professionals. Bill Grabe, Dwight Atkinson, Dana Ferris, Vi Ramanath. I'm sure I'm leaving many people out, but just to think of it, that how he followed and fostered the networking. And I was a recipient of his fostering networking. I was introduced to Dwight Atkinson through him. I was introduced to Bill Grabe through him. I was introduced to the works of Dana and Vi and many others, thanks to him. So let's just keep that in mind, and keep that in mind as we mentor other people and develop us as professionals. So now I'm turning to the topic of today, also his legacy on contrastive rhetoric and intercultural rhetoric. You all are familiar in his seminal article, Cultural Thought Patterns in Intercultural Education in Language Learning in 1966, where he was analyzing student writing, international student writing at USC, where he was a teacher, with the idea of preparing university instructors, other instructors, to teach academic writing to the international students, to a growing number of international students in the United States. And the essential thesis was that preferred patterns of discourse and writing are shaped by cultural, linguistic, and educational forces that can create significant challenges for second language learners in advanced writing situations. I first encountered that article when I was teaching at Georgetown University in the early 1980s, when I was teaching methodology classes. And I just identified with that article so much, having been an international student myself and struggled with second language writing. So I contacted Bob Kaplan, and this was, early 1980s. The article was published in 1966. And there were no emails at that time. Phoning was too expensive. Those kinds of things weren't happening. So I wrote him a letter, and I said, really loved that article. And can we organize a panel for colloquium for TESOL the following year? I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And for 3 years, we organized a panel on contrastive rhetoric. And again, that just also showed me how a professional like he organizes things, invites people, builds networks. So let me move on to the next slide here. So out of the colloquia, out of the papers on the colloquia, he and I edited a book, Writing Across Languages, Analysis of L2 Text, 1987, which included highlights from those panels and had chapters written by Bill Eckington, John Hines, Shirley Osler, Bill Grabe, many of those chapters still being quoted a lot. And it was during the editing of that book that I truly, truly got to understand how influential, how generous Bob Kaplan was as an advisor and mentor. This was the first book project I was ever involved. So he showed me how to write a book proposal. He, was helping me how to communicate with the publishers. And of course, with selecting articles or editing articles. And I want to tell you what will always stay in my mind, another really memorable, wonderful experience. He and Audrey invited me to come to their home in Palos Verdes, Los Angeles, for a few days to work on the final editing of the book. I lived in their house. What an experience to be able to have coffee and breakfast with them, have dinner with them, look at the sunsets in LA, and learn about how a professional goes about editing, writing questions after the chapters for discussions, etc. Bill Grabe also came in for a couple of days because he had a chapter in that book. But I mean, my goodness, you really can't pay for that kind of experience, and keep in mind, I was not his grad student either. So after that book, the cross-cultural writing studies just took off, really. Several of our colleagues from all parts of the world, Toshiko Yoshimura, Ana Moreno, Miguel Garrido, Pilar Duenas, many, many others, just really began studying cross-cultural differences and similarities in writing and how to apply them to different genres, not only student essay writing. And in that period, we moved away from an ethnocentric role of English, which in that article that Bob wrote, it was sometimes misinterpreted also. And, we just wanted to be very, very much of including diversity and so on. And we were moving text analysis from paragraph level organization to looking at discourse features. Lots of developments in text analysis of written products, as well as processes of writing. And also greater diversity of genres and first languages that were included as the multilingual writers. So academic journals, conference abstracts, undergraduate essays, lab reports, business letters, emails, medical case notes, etc., etc. I think, do I see Ana Moreno there? Yes, yes. Ana Moreno was one big work, a very, very important work on academic writing across cultures. Ana was also one of the visiting scholars at IUPUI, as was Miguel and as was Pilar and as were many others. So thank you for joining. So let's move on here. So that whole period after the 1987 led into lots of developments in intercultural rhetoric. And here thinking of also of Diane Belcher's book, Reflections on Multiliterate Lives, that really brought to us the multiliteracies that advanced scholars, for example, go, the shuttling across communities and literacies and so on. So expanding the area of what we look at in intercultural rhetoric. And then, of course, Diane's and Gail Nelson's book, Critical and Corpus-Based Approaches to Intercultural Rhetoric, which I think tells it all, that we go away also from textual analysis to a more critical analysis. And in my book in 1996, I was also developing the scientific base of contrastive rhetoric and intercultural rhetoric in terms of text analysis, in terms of looking at writing from many different other than textual perspectives. And then in 2011, my book Intercultural Rhetoric, you know, also sums up some of those developments about us not only looking at contrast, but looking at interactions and understanding dynamic nature of cultures, genres, texts, and so on. Let's see. Yes. And the intercultural tenets, as I call them there, and a lot of that work going into this book was also influenced very much by Dwight Atkinson's input on where contrastive rhetoric could be going, and also by the intercultural rhetoric conferences that were held at IUPUI, University of Michigan, Georgia State, Ohio State University, and of course also the work of people working in genre analysis, John Swales, who very much encouraged our looking at genres across cultures. John Flowerdew, Ken Highland. I think we have all worked in parallel, in benefiting from each other's work. And then definitely that we see text now in a full context, not just taking text without understanding how they were produced, who were the writers, who were the audience, etc. And the big idea about cultures being complex and dynamic, and there being small cultures and large cultures, ethnic national cultures and disciplinary cultures and youth culture and women's culture and so on. And I think also that good writing for any genre needs accommodation and negotiation by the writers, who can use their L1, L2 resources, their L1 genre resources, their L2 genre resources in producing effective writing for their audiences. If it's publishing, if it's writing term papers, lab reports, business reports, what not. So the approaches, the methods to intercultural rhetoric have evolved from contrastive analysis of text to text and context, culture side dynamic, variety of analysis, used in trying to understand the text, where they come from, and how we can help the writers for specific audiences. And then, of course, also how we consider the native speaker status and our sensitivity to English as a lingua franca, which is in the forefront of the work that continues. And I want to just share with you briefly about some of the latest work on intercultural rhetoric that I'm involved with SLWIS, Kyle McIntosh, and SN Gopnikar Shelton, where we have been encouraged and where we're using intercultural rhetoric as a bridge between English for academic purposes and translingualism. I don't need to get into explanations and definitions of translingualism here. I don't have the time and I couldn't do it justice, but our work of using intercultural rhetoric has been found useful to help operationalize some of the theories of translingualism for teaching practice in the work that we have done, and that's a paper there by Essen and Kyle and me in 2017 in Journal for English for Academic Purposes. We argue that teachers of multilingual writers don't have the tools for applying translingualism in their classrooms for a number of reasons. And that the tools, the text analysis tools, and how we used intercultural rhetoric in TESOL and applied linguistics can be helpful in understanding how to get some of the very important aspects of translingual theories, like the negotiation and accommodation, working. And so that article with Kyle in 2017 appeared in Journal of English for Academic Purposes. And then last year, SLWIS and Kyle and I published a paper on looking at empirically interviewing learners at different stages of their writing. We were looking graduate or postgraduate students, looking at how much they were using L1 writing, L1 rhetorical cultures, L2 ones, and so on, rather than thinking that one size fits all when we're instructing people. And we found some really interesting things. We found that language proficiency truly affects how aware writers are about the use of their first language or second language resources, or the use of their first or second language genre knowledge. And I think Estella Ene may be signed in for this webinar, and perhaps she could, if you have questions, perhaps she could tell you more about that. Also, I have in the references a presentation that Kyle McIntosh gave at the SLW last year in Tempe, Arizona, about his use of intercultural rhetoric methods in an undergraduate class, where he is truly getting undergraduate students to compare writing in different genres between their first language situations and their second language situations, and helping them to analyze and make revisions depending on how they understand their audiences. And I think it's very, very nice work where intercultural rhetoric principles are put into theories are putting into practice. That's helping in multilingual teaching situations. So in conclusion, and here to remember and honor the legacy, the accomplishments, and the leadership of Bob Kaplan. I would like to say that Intercultural Rhetoric continues in its mission to help teachers and students with our research and with our teaching. I believe that Intercultural Rhetoric has given and gives tools for teachers and students to understand how discourse structures, genres, and cultures vary. And what I would also emphasize is that in Intercultural Rhetoric, we do have a focus on the learners or on the students. And that with our work, we are encouraging teachers to become researchers and ethnographers in their own classrooms, to understand their students' backgrounds and their current situations, and to have a good, I'll go back to that, discourse structure, genres, and cultures, have a theoretical understanding about those and what that means. Dwight Atkinson has used this phrase, I hope I'm quoting him right. We should look at our students individually and culturally. And I would agree with that in that cultures do matter. And we need to look at those together, individuals and cultures. And then I believe that the hard work, relying on empiricism, and Ana Moreno, you know that as well as anyone, how hard the work is when you are analyzing text in Spanish and in English, and any one of you can identify the hard work and the good text analysis, and also carefully following current needs and changing situations of our students or the world, the global environment. We've done that. And we've been open to interdisciplinary influences. And that will bring very good results. And I'd like to believe that Bob Kaplan would agree. So I've got reference list here for you, some of the works that I mentioned. Be happy to share many more to you if you're willing. And I just very much thank you for coming in today, and I look forward to comments or questions you have, and thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ulla, for this wonderful talk. And I guess we're opening the floor to questions. If you could please post your questions on the chat, we'd be happy to answer. Chat box, let's see.
If not questions, maybe stories to share.
Hi, can I make a comment just by unmuting myself?
Oh, Estela.
Yes. Hi. Okay, I turned on my video too. I don't know if you can see me.
Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you for the personal stories that you shared about Bob Kaplan, because I think for a lot of people who don't know him or didn't know him as a person, I think it's wonderful to know somebody from our field who is so important as what they might have been like, what they were like as a person, rather than, you know, a citation that you use a lot, like a, you know, distant name from the ivory tower, the academic ivory tower. So I appreciate that very much. And I love what you said about who he was as a mentor and what impact he had on you, as well as other prominent people in our field as a mentor. And I think I was just reflecting on what makes a person or a scholar have such an effect on a field, like you said, like, you know, to become the giant on whose shoulders many others grow. And I think that his impact comes from a lot from noticing something that is one of those simple truths, right? That change, or when somebody speaks it out, it really makes a lot of sense, and you wonder how you didn't come up with that, right? So that simple truth, I think, is that culture matters. And I think in your work, Ula, you continued to make that argument that culture matters. And the field of applied linguistics has gone through a lot of iterations of how we define culture and what culture means. But no matter what, the message from the original work of Bob Kaplan remains, and that is at the core of a lot of what we still do. So these are some thoughts that were crossing through my mind as you were talking. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Estela. And I think you said it very right, that something that what he was seeing in 1966, he was one of the only first researchers even looking at international student writing. And what he saw was so intuitive. And thank you for saying that. And I'm so glad that it got published, and it has brought so much attention. Yes, thank you.
Roxana?
Yeah, we do have some questions, Ula. I'll read one of the questions. It's asking, is it possible in near future to see insertion of L1 in L2 of foreign language writing?
I don't know if I understand that. Is a question about is contrastive rhetoric, intercultural rhetoric being applied in foreign language situations? Because so much of the work has been on English, writing in English. Is that the question? I think there's some work going on in other languages, of course, French and German and so on. Yes, that's what I would say. But maybe this is a very good question, and I'm happy to respond on email. We can have conversations about that, if that's okay. All right.
Yeah, thank you, Ula.
Yeah, there are many questions right now. Can I just pick one from here?
Uh-huh.
Again, on the subject of Bob Kaplan and his kindness to students. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I think this might actually be a comment, but I'll continue anyways. One of Bob's former grad students was tragically killed in a car accident in 2005. Long after his retirement, he worked to make sure that her research was published, which is actually a very, very beautiful, kind act, yeah. Roxana?
Yeah, there is another question, Ula. I'll read that question. What are the differences between the approach you espouse and genre analysis, such as by Highland, while, for example, Tardy, among many others, underscores the relationship between content and language? How would you sum up Kaplan's legacy? Thank you.
Okay, if I, heard it right, it's what are similarities between genre analysis and intercultural rhetorical analysis? Yes. Yeah. I mean, we worked hand in hand, really. I mean, intercultural rhetoric has so much benefited from genre analysis, first from John Swales's work and the others who have followed in the EAP and ESP traditions very, very much. And I think I'd like to quote, and I hope I'm quoting John Flowerdew right, but we heard him say at one conference also that in EAP, in English for Academic Purposes, the two strongholds have been genre analysis and intercultural rhetoric. And because, you know, so much of the work, indeed, the last 20 years, since intercultural rhetoric affects academic writing, has been on genre analysis, research articles, dissertations, but with the intercultural focus on it. In my references, I have a reference to Pilar Dueñas's edited book, co-edited book on, I actually have a slide here. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a very, very good book, Intercultural Perspectives on Research Writing. So I think it just sort of really brings those two things, intercultural and genre analysis and academic EAP writing analysis, a wonderful selection of articles. Ken Hyland has a foreword in that book, and I have an epilogue in that book. So I think our fields, we're all applied linguists. We worked hand in hand, and I'm very happy about it.
Yes, thank you, Ulla. Yes, that answers, I believe, the question. And we did see the slide that you shared with us.
Okay.
Yeah. The second part of the question was, how would you sum up Kaplan's legacy?
How would I sum up Kaplan's legacy? How would I sum up? Well, okay. I think that's a good point. I talked a long time, but what was my sum up? I would just say that our TESOL, applied linguistics, and our fields would not be the same had it not been for him. His smarts, his hard work, his great personality, who encouraged us in our research and in our professional lives. There was one thing I also wanted to mention when we talked about his support of his encouragement of his students, and especially of women and minorities. That not only was it in the area of publishing and teaching, applied linguistics, do research that's applicable. That was all him, okay? And I think that's what we are, okay? If we are doing research that we apply in a classroom, or if we are doing research that we apply in language policy planning, or if we're doing research that we apply in healthcare context. Applied linguistics to the very core, not linguistics for linguistics' sake. I hope I'm not upsetting anyone. But also just wanted to tell you that applied linguistics to the very core, that not only will we, well, at least the way, you know, I define professional in applied linguistics and TESOL, it's not just writing papers and publishing papers, but it's being a good teacher, and it's also being a good program administrator and developer. When I started the ESL, which is now the EAP program at IUPUI, my university, in 1985, couple years into it, see, this was a new thing. My university was fairly new. We had only been in function for 10 years, but there were more and more international students coming. So the university wanted some help for the international students and asked me to set it up. And I did. I did the best I could, and I think it worked. But I was able to have him to come as a reviewer. He traveled from LA to Indiana, stayed all night in my house in West Lafayette. We didn't have very much money. The university didn't have very much money to compensate people for reviews. He did a great review because he knew what he was talking about. He had been a president of NAFTA. He had been a president of TESOL. He was able to really see what was going well and what more we could be doing, okay? And he wrote a very good, thorough, powerful report for the administrators. You know, that's something I wouldn't have been able to tell those administrators, okay? So I don't know, this to me sums up Bob in being the utmost, the best professional you can be.
Yeah, I think it's not that easy to summarize, but I can probably help you. Being a giant, but also as a teacher, it seems that really came across from the very beginning in your presentation and even now at the end when we ask this question. I'll ask one more and then Eileen will ask next. This question is, what misconceptions still exist that people new to this area should be aware of? So what are the misconceptions that are still out there if we have some people that are new to the field?
Okay, very good question, very good question. Because I think because Bob's 1966 article was intuitively so powerful. And so sometimes when researchers get a copy of it, as I did, we start thinking that, yes, maybe these diagrams do work, and we start seeing them or using them, which can easily lead us into stereotyping and so on. So I would say that forgetting how much has been done between 1966, after the work that he started, his earlier work, and where we are now, I think that would be said as a big misconception. And I myself have been hurt on occasions some years ago when, you know, it seemed that at presentations and going to conferences, it was very popular, fashionable to put contrastive rhetoric into the corner of, you know, that's bad and so on, without realizing that we've moved. We understand the world has changed. The disciplines have changed. Anything changes. Any good research that gets done always builds another research. So that's what I would say, misconception. And the fact that, you really need to realize that, we understand cultures are dynamic and varying. We can't talk about the Finnish speaker of English, like me, having been in the United States for 50 years. I've written about Finnish and English writing, but no one, I couldn't say I'm of Finnish culture. And that's why, there's so many other influences on me throughout these times. So I would say the misconception is more like lack of information or understanding what intercultural rhetoric has done and can do, So I don't know if anyone else there wants to jump in or have a different view or have a fresh view, because it seems to me that maybe that question came from someone knowing, so I would ask this person who asked this question. So what would you say?
Yeah, please feel free to answer just by unmuting yourself if you wish to.
That was my question. I just want to thank you for that. And part of it comes from
I work with pre-service teachers, helping them understand the diverse student populations they have in K through 12, but also at university, and helping the faculty understand how to work with the international student population. And I think it's important because the 1966 article definitely is something that they run across at times. And I just want to make sure, and I think your answer is a wonderful way that to explain it to them, that they need to look at the changes, look at the continuum of understanding what intercultural rhetoric is and what it can do for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the next question is, just a minute.
Are you looking at the question by Ana Morena? How can the focus of intercultural rhetoric on the individual be integrated in the intercultural framework so that its results can still be applied to the teaching of English as a foreign language in large classroom learning situations?
Well, I would turn that back to Anna. Anna, you have dealt with the issues of intercultural rhetoric, and you also one who has moved from text analysis to looking at various experiences of people. So I'll turn it to you, because I think you'll have some really good ideas from a situation in Spain where Ana is a professor and teaches English as a foreign language.
Hello, well, good evening everyone. I actually asked that question because this is an issue I haven't resolved yet, and it's an honest question. Yes, because I mean, for me, the conflict that I usually find is that for me to be able to achieve intercultural results that I can apply in the classroom in a meaningful way, is that I need to draw, you know, language and cultural features from a set of situations, a set of texts, yes, rather than individual writers, so that I can identify patterns, you know, that I can then talk about to my students. You know, so rather than focus on anecdotal evidence from individual students, I tend to, you know, to identify those patterns so that the findings can be more applicable or can be applied to a wider group of individuals rather than a particular individual. So I'm trying to identifying common features, and I think in large classroom situations those common features might be more relevant than talking about the idiosyncrasies of particular writers. You know, of course you can also go into those details if you had more face-to-face teaching interactions with the students. Then you could look at their own problems and the reasons for their problems writing in the foreign language. But when I'm dealing with a large group, I find it more relevant to talk about, writing issues that apply to the whole group rather than a particular individual.
Thank you.
That's my problem. And this focus on the individual. Yeah.
I think that, thank you so much for bringing it up, because the EFL situations, can be so different from the ESL situations here, for example. And what I would think of your students also is that, and it applies to all the applications of intercultural rhetoric. And here comes some of the controversies, is how much of genre structures should we be teaching to our learners. And in your situation, I know that you've given advice for writers writing Spanish, native Spanish speakers writing English academic articles. And they want the tools, the discourses for that audience. And if we have generalizable results, yes. And your situation, your students mainly have the same native language background as the schooling. So EFL situation is somewhat different, but I'm glad you bring that up, because that's at the core of, I think, so much of our really empirical work and both in genre analysis and intercultural rhetoric, that we want to be able to talk about the things that the audiences for which our learners are communicating with value and appreciate. And I've said this many times also in writing, etc., that doesn't mean that we are robbing them out of their first language genre knowledge. In some cases where it wouldn't even be there, maybe they haven't written academic writing. It's those issues that Estella and Kyle and I write about in that article last year, is that, so many of the learners who were graduate students in the United States learning to write papers in English for academic purposes and publishing them wanted to hear from their ESP teachers how to have structure and modeling for it. And so rather than us saying and going, anything goes, I mean, we share what we know about what seems rather, general expectations in writing for certain purposes. I think that's at least has always been in my mind as well. And maybe undergraduate situations and multilingual situations in the United States, something like the ideals of translingualism are very important to keep in mind. Okay, all right. Thank you, Anna, very much for making that point.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'm just going to take one more quick question because we're running out of time and we will have to conclude. So as we mentioned before, if your question has not been answered for any reason, please just contact Ula, or I've written my email here also. I can give Ula's email to you. We will help you get in touch with her, and we will answer the questions for sure. But the last question is, what would you consider Mr. Kaplan's best work relative to intercultural rhetoric research about ESL domain? Application to TESOL.
I go back to the 1966 article. That got it all started. All right.
Okay.
And that's a wonderful legacy to celebrate, and work that has been very fruitful for us in TESOL and applied linguistics. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming and joining in, and I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to being in touch, and intercultural rhetoric is alive and well. Thank you for your contributions.
Well, thank you everyone for attending this webinar. We will be sending information about the recording, as well as the PowerPoint slides will be available to you. We really appreciate you joining us from, I'm sorry for the background noise. So we really appreciate you joining us from around the world, and we will keep the conversation going. Intercultural Communication Intersection has coffee hour, which will be taking place June 26th. Please join us. I'll be sending more information about this. And Arlene says is going to tell you a little bit about next event for second language writing intersection.
Yeah, so if you're looking for something fun to do, nice to do, please join us this summer. We have a lot of events lined up, and the most recent one is second language writing standing group at ICIS and second language writing interest section webinar advocating for multilingual writers through anti-racist and translingual teaching and administrative practices. We have the Zoom link here, which again, I can share if you're interested. And it's going to be Friday, June 26th at 3 p.m. EST. And I would like to thank Ulla Connor very much for joining us today, for her valuable time and her valuable ideas and the wonderful legacy speech she gave. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. And we are looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you, and have a wonderful day today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
For joining us.
Goodbye. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.